This is an interesting story about a little princess. Her name was Sarah Crowe, and it was her first time she was coming into the streets of London. She had come along with her father on a huge ship all the way from India, and tomorrow, the following day, her father would be sailing back, leaving her in a hostel. The cab stopped by a dull brick house. Outside was a large brass sign that read Miss Mitchin's Boarding School for Young Ladies. In this place, is this the place, Papa? Sarah asked hesitantly. Yes, this is it, Captain Crewe replied, squeezing her hand. Just then, the heavy front door opened and Miss Mitchin came out to greet them. She had cold, fishy eyes and a cold, fishy smile. You must be Sarah, she said. Welcome to your new home. Oh, what a pretty child you are. Behind Miss Mitchin came Miss Amelia, her younger sister. Welcome, welcome, she said, bobbing up and down with a nervous courtesy. Sarah is to have everything she wants, said Captain Crewe. I want no expense spared. Of course, said Miss Mitchin, Minchin, a cold smile creeping over her lips. As our richest pupil, she will have the prettiest bedroom, a pony and carriage, and her very own maid. Captain Crewe went with Sarah to her sitting room. I am sure you will be happy here, he said. You could have stayed in India with me. The heat made you ill, and the schools are better here. I know, said Sarah, trying to be brave, but now the moment had come to say goodbye. It was even more awful than she had imagined. They hugged each other as if they would never let each other go. When Sarah came down the next morning, everyone stared at her. All the girls had heard that the new pupil was as rich as a princess. She's even got a French maid, whispered Jessie, one of the older pupils, and I saw her trunk. It's full of fur coats. Well, Jessie's friend, Lavinia, added spitefully, I heard Miss Minchin say her clothes were ridiculously grand for a child. Until Sarah arrived, Lavinia had been Miss Minchin's best dressed pupil. Now Sarah would take her place. The other girls soon adored Sarah. She held tea parties in her sitting room for the younger children and let them play with her doll Emily. In the evenings, she made up stories of kings and queens and beautiful princesses. The others sat before her and listened and they were entertained. Sarah had been at Miss Minchin's school for 2 years when one foggy afternoon she came back to her room to find someone asleep in her chair. Looking down, Sarah saw it was Becky, the sculler maid. Poor thing, she must be exhausted, thought Sarah. At that moment, Becky opened her eyes with a frightened gasp. Oh, miss, she shuddered. I beg your pardon. It was the warm fire and me being so tired. Don't worry, said Sarah, laughing. You couldn't help it. Becky stared at Sarah, She was used to being ordered about and scolded. She couldn't believe this girl was being kind to her. Aren't you angry, ma'am? Gasped Becky. No, cried Sarah. Of course not. We are just the same. You know, I am only a girl like you. It's just chance that I am not you and you are not me. Sarah offered some cakes to Becky and she was very pleased. I'd love to be a princess, said Sarah. Perhaps I'll being pretending I'm one. I could think of ways to help people like real princesses. Will you come and see me again, Becky? Oh, yes, please, said Becky and hurried out of the room before Miss Minchin found her. A few weeks later, Sarah received a letter from her father. It set the whole school talking. An old friend has offered me a share in his diamond mines, wrote Captain Crew. We'll be rich beyond my wildest dreams. It makes me dizzy to think of it. Then, shortly before Sarah's 11th birthday, she had another letter from her father. This one sounded quite different. I fear your father is not a businessman, he wrote. Each night I lie tossing and turning. I can't sleep for trying to work out the sums. I wish you were here with me. But despite his worries, Captain Crew wrote to Miss Minchin telling her to organize an amazing birthday for Sarah. Sarah was led into the schoolroom by Miss Minchin. Behind her came the servants carrying boxes overflowing with presents. Sarah requested Mrs. Minchin, asking Becky to stay for the party. Miss Minchin jumped. My dear Sarah, she said, Becky is only a maid. Maids are not like young ladies. But Becky is. Please let us stay because it's my birthday. You're too kind, Sarah. Becky, go and stand there, said Miss Minchin, sharply waving at the door. The instant Miss Minchin had swept out of the room, everyone rushed to see Sarah open her presents. There were books and hats, necklaces, but the best of all, there was a magnificent doll. A little while later, Miss Amelia popped her head around the school door. You are too good for tea, girls. A solicitor has arrived and Miss Minchin wants to talk to him in here. After the talk, Miss Minchin was in a rage. Where is Sarah Crewe? She snapped to her sister. She's in the tea room with the others, of course, said Amelia. Go and tell her to put on a black dress, ordered Miss Minchin. Oh, sister, cried Miss Amelia, what happened? Miss Minchin wasted no words. Captain Crewe is dead. He died of jungle fever, and she added furiously, he has lost all his money. I paid for this ridiculous party and all those presents. I'll never get my money back now, she screamed. Captain Crewe put all his money into his so called friend's diamond mine. Then the friend disappeared. I'd like to throw Sarah out on the street, only it would look bad for the school. When Sarah came to see Miss Minchin, her face was white and her eyes were red from crying. She held her doll tightly in her arms. Put down your doll, ordered Miss Minchin. No, Sarah answered. I won't. My father wanted me to have her. She's all I have left of him. Everything is different now, said Miss Minchin, growing angry. You are a beggar. Do you understand? You have no relations, no home. no one to take care of you. Sarah's thin, pale twitched and she said nothing. Don't stare at me like that, Miss Minchin snapped. You are going to work for your living now. You can sleep in the attic in the room next to Becky. And thank me, girl, said Miss Minchin. Why should I thank you for being kind to you and giving you a home? But you are not kind, said Sarah fiercely, and this is not a home. She turned and ran out of the room before Miss Minchin could see her cry. That first night in the attic, Sarah lay awake in the dark. She could hear rats scuffling in the walls. My father's dead, she sobbed. I'll never see him again. Everything in Sarah's life changed at once. When she came down the next morning, Lavinia had taken her place next to Miss Minchin. You are late, Sarah, said Miss Minchin coldly. Don't let it happen again. Begin your new duties by looking after the little ones. Every day, Sarah was sent on errand after errand. She was expected to go out in all weathers and to dust and scrub the rooms. At the end of each busy day, Miss Minchin sent her to the schoolroom to study so she would learn enough to teach the younger pupils. Over time, Sarah's frocks grew shorter and shabbier, and she became thin and pale. The other pupils stopped talking to her. To think she was the girl with the diamond mines, scoffed Lavinia. Now she's nothing. I won't cry, thought Sarah, biting hard on her lip. I won't. Her only friend was Becky. They had little chance to talk during the day, but each night Becky crept into Sarah's room. Let's pretend this room is covered in thick, soft rugs, said Sarah. Over in the corner, there's a little sofa with cushions you can curl up on. And a blazing fire. Oh, said Becky, stretching out her hands. I can almost feel it, miss. But once Becky had left, Sarah's vision faded from her mind, and the attic was as cold and bare as before. One morning, on her way back from the butcher's, Sarah saw that a van full of furniture had stopped outside the empty house next door. Someone must be moving in, thought Sarah. Glancing at the pieces of furniture, she had a weird homesick feeling. They reminded her of the things they had in India. An English gentleman was moved in, Becky told her that night. He's come from India and his name is Mr. Carrisford. He is rich, but he's been very ill. When Sarah next looked out of her window, she heard an odd little squeaky sound coming from the next door attic. She looked over and saw an Indian manservant. She said to herself, he was holding a small, chattering monkey. Suddenly, it broke free, ran across the slates, and jumped into Sarah's attic. Shall I try and catch him? Sarah called to the Lascar. No need, Missy Sahib, he answered. I am Ramdas. Will come and get him. In no time, he had skipped across the rooftops and slipped through her skylight. Ramdas bowed to Sarah, then caught the monkey with ease. My master is very fond of this little one, he said, stroking the monkey. He thanked Sarah, bowed once more, and went back across the rooftops. He spoke to me as if I were a princess, not a servant girl, thought Sarah. My clothes might be in rags, but maybe I can still be a princess inside. Meanwhile, in the house next door, Ramdas was telling his master about the little girl in the attic. Poor thing, said Mr. Carrisford. He looked up at his friend. Do you suppose, Phillips, he said slowly, that the child I am looking for is living like the little girl next door? No, said Mr. Phillips soothingly. I am sure the little girl you are looking for is the one in Paris, and she seems to be in good hands. I can't be sure, Mr. Carrisford replied. After all, her name is different. They pronounce it Carew instead of Crew. But the circumstances are so similar, said Mr. Phillips. An English officer places his motherless little girl in a school, then dies suddenly after losing a fortune. You are sure the child was left in Paris? Mr. Phillips went on. I am sure of nothing, said Mr. Carrisford. When I met Ralph Crewe in India, all we spoke of were the diamond mines. I must find his daughter. If she is penniless, it's my fault. Crewe died, thinking I was a villain. I, if only I hadn't been sick, I could have told him we hadn't lost the money. Try not to worry, said Mr. Phillips. I leave for Paris tonight and I'll find his daughter. Mr. Carrisford turned to Ram Das. In the meantime, he said, let's do something for the little girl in the attic. That night, Ramdas slipped silently into Sarah's attic as she slept. He padded noiselessly across the room, weaving his magic. Sarah stirred as her skylight clicked shut. How strange, she thought. My room is so warm, and I can actually feel blankets. I must be dreaming. I don't want to open my eyes, she thought, or this dream will fade. But it felt so real she couldn't resist opening them. And the dream didn't melt away. There was a blazing fire in her room, blankets and rugs, and a feast laid out on the table. It's magic, thought Sarah. There was also a note to the little girl in the attic from a friend. When she saw it, Sarah burst into tears. Becky, Becky, Sarah whispered as loudly as she dared. Wake up, come and see the magic. At the end of each day, Becky and Sarah now climbed their attic stairs to find a fire blazing merrily and plates piled high with food. Miss Minchin couldn't understand why Sarah and Becky were so cheerful. Perhaps Sarah is a princess after all, suggested Miss Amelia. How else could she cope so bravely? Don't be ridiculous, snapped Miss Minchin. But she hated seeing Sarah so happy. A few months later, just before Sarah went to work, she heard a scratching sound at the skylight. It had been snowing all night, and on the snow, crouched near the skylight, was a tiny shivering figure. Oh, it's the monkey from next door, cried Sarah. I'll coax him in. He can't stay out in the cold. As Sarah was letting in the monkey, Mr. Carrisford was greeting Mr. Phillips in the house next door. He had just returned from Paris. It wasn't the child we are looking for, Mr. Phillips said sadly. Her name was Emily, and she is much younger than Captain Crewe's little girl. Mr. Carrisford sighed. Well, then, he said, we must begin our search again at once. Perhaps the magic was at work again For as he spoke, Ramdas came into the room. Sahib, he said, the girl from the attic has come. She brings back the monkey. Your monkey ran away again, Sarah explained. Shall I give him to the Lascar? How do you know he is a Lascar? Said Mr. Carrisford, smiling a little. I was born in India, explained Sarah, handing over the monkey. Miss Carrisford sat up suddenly, and now, he said, now you live next door, but not as a pupil. At first I was a pupil, said Sarah. I was taken there by my papa, but then he died without any money, and now I sleep in the attic and work for my living. How did your father lose his money? Mr. Phillips broke in breathlessly. He had a friend he was very fond of who took all his money and ran away, said Sarah quietly. What was your father's name? Mr. Carrisford asked. Tell me. His name was Ralph Crewe, Sarah answered, feeling startled. Captain Crewe? He died in India. It's her, gasped Mr. Carrisford. It's her. What do you mean? Sarah asked. I've spent the last 2 years looking for you, said Mr. Carrisford. I was your father's friend. I didn't really lose his money, he went on. I thought I'd lose it, and that made me ill. But when I was well enough to tell your father, he was already dead. Sarah spoke as if she were in a dream, and I was at Miss Minchin's all the while, she whispered, just on the other side of the wall. You need never go back, said Mr. Carrisford gently. I'll take care of you now. Miss Minchin was furious when she found out the diamond mines were real after all, she sobbed. Now I am not going to see a penny of that money in school fees, and Sarah is taking Becky with her. I don't deserve this. When I think of all I did for that child. For the first time in her life, Miss Amelia spoke her mind to her sister. You don't deserve any of Sarah's money, she said. It's your fault for being a hard, selfish woman. Miss Minchin gasped in shock, and from then on she began to have a little more respect for her sister. The next day, Mr. Carrisford took Sarah out into the garden. So, Sarah, he said, what are you going to do with your money? I am going to help people, Sarah replied, just like a real princess. So, the little girl turned out to be a princess. Thank you. Thank you for watching.